And still ahead, CNN goes to the front line in Iraq, where Shiite fighters are defending the Baghdad airport, the all-important airport, as ISIS militants close in. And 2 U.S. generals are standing by to share their insights into the situation in Iraq right now and whether Iraqi forces can be trusted to stand and fight. And here we want to bring in Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. He's a CNN military analyst, and he was also the top U.S. commander in northern Iraq, which Barbara just spoke about, during the troop surge. Also with us, the former CENTCOM commander, General Anthony Zinni. And first to you, General Zinni. The Iraq army has collapsed in so many of these areas. I think a lot of Americans look at this and they say, what's going on? The American troops were spending years trying to train these folks. Why aren't they able to fight back?
Well, I think there's several reasons. I imagine the state of morale has not been very high. The equipping of the army was slow in coming. They didn't see themselves as fighting for their homes. I think it will stiffen around Baghdad for several reasons. I think there may be some elite units that will stand up. And certainly the Shia militia know they're fighting for their religious sites and homes. And so I think the stand around Baghdad will end up being a better show than they did in the north.
General Hertling, you have some really interesting insight because you were actually in Baghdad for 15 months from 2003 to 2004. I know that you had some very close relationships with some of the division commanders there who were not Shia. They were Kurds, they were Sunni. And then you started to see what? You started to see them pulled?
Well, Brianna, what I'd say is the division commanders I had very strong relationships were within the north. We had 5 divisions that we were working with. We had 2 Kurdish commanders, 2 Sunni commanders, and a Shia commander. Soon after we left, those commanders were pulled, they were replaced. And I think what General Zinni said is anytime you have an organization that has poor and toxic leadership, and I think we've seen that over the years since the U.S. has left, in the replacement of very good commanders, the organization loses its fabric and falls apart. That's what's happened in the north. The soldiers have not been supported by the government. Some of the tribal leaders have told them to quit fighting for the government, which they don't perceive as on their side. And I think that's generated some of the problems in the north.
Barbara,
in Baghdad.
Oh, sorry. Go on, General. Go on.
Now, in Baghdad, you're going to have a very different story because I think you have organizations closer to the flagpole. You do, as General Zinni said, have commando units and some Iraqi special operations forces. But it's going to be tenuous on the western side of town. The neighborhoods around the Baghdad airport are Sunni neighborhoods, Ghazaliya, Mansour. Those are places that were promised to Udi Hussein when he was still in power, and a lot of military leaders retired there. So that's a huge Sunni neighborhood. There's going to be some good support for ISIS and the Sunni revolutionaries in that area.
No, that's very alarming. And Barbara, I know you have a question.
I do, and I want to put it to General Zinni. I mean, the U.S. military for years has been working at training troops in Iraq, training troops in Afghanistan. But if U.S. Special Forces can't get out on the ground, can't walk the ground and see the actual troops out there, can this advisory mission really work? What can it really accomplish? How do they know flat out that the Iraqis aren't lying to them?
Well, I think that you're absolutely right, Barbara. You need to get out with the units on the front lines. And that's what our special forces are expert in doing. The teams need to be out there to get an assessment of not only what the Iraqi military is and what they can and can't do, what is the situation, what is the mood, as Mark said, in the villages and in the neighborhoods. And the point about being up in the north, I'm surprised we're not in Kurdistan. That's in the north, and certainly the Peshmerga will fight. I think we ought to think about surrounding ISIS in Jordan, in the Kurdish areas, and even along the Saudi border. No one wants to see this thing metastasize and move into those areas. And that's where we've got to get these eyes on the ground and to get an assessment as to how we can contain this. But I would make one other point. It isn't a matter of just military capability. This government, Maliki's government, had better deliver something that the Sunnis can look to and be willing to resist ISIS so that they have a government they can believe in after this.
Can you imagine a situation, Barbara, where there would be, as the general mentioned, troops surrounding ISIS?
Well, you know, I mean, this is a political decision, certainly for the White House, for President Obama to make about whether he wants to send troops into the Middle East. I think every president in history that has done that has found it to be problematic. So I guess my question goes back very quickly to both General Zinni and General Hertling. Does the Pentagon need to take a bit more risk and have those special forces get out there and do their job? Because if they're going to stay in Iraqi brigade headquarters, it's hard to see what they're really going to accomplish.
Well, I'll answer
the answer
first.
From my point of view is yes, and I certainly defer to Mark, who's been on that ground and worked it and knows it better than anybody else.
Well, and I'd also suggest, Barbara, it's a great question, but I think some of these special forces and special operating forces that are part of this advisory group, their initial mission was to feel this out. Let's get an assessment. Where are things? And the fact that Iraqi generals in command in Baghdad may be lying to them, hey, these guys have been around for the last 10 years dealing with these guys. They know when the flag needs to be thrown on some of the things that are being said. They are likely in some of the Kurdish provinces. I would think, in fact, even some of the embassy officials have been moved up to Erbil. So I think we've got some very close connections with the Peshmerga and with the ASAF. We had that when I was in the north. And so I think we're getting some probably getting some very good intelligence from the Kurdish forces and from the Kurdish government. At the same time, we're concerned about Baghdad. Given Mr. Maliki the time to pull his forces together, possibly make those right political moves. If those moves aren't made, if there's not more inclusion, it doesn't matter how many forces you put on the ground, it's not going to make a difference. We had 160,000 there for almost 10 years, and without the constant pull on the politicians to do the right things, we won't get the kind of mission completion that we're looking for.
General Zinni, I'm wondering, when you look, and I know that perhaps you think that the U.S. maybe should have been in Iraq longer than it was, what do you think things would look like now if there were troops and they'd stayed longer?
You know, I was out there in 2008. As a matter of fact, I visited Mark's units up in the north. On the ground, as long as we were there, the United States, you know, we were building the kind, at ground level, the kind of military, the kind of hope into the villages that I think was necessary. But everybody told me if Maliki doesn't follow up on this, if he doesn't reach out, if his government isn't inclusive, if he doesn't share power and the distribution of resources down to the provincial and district levels, this will all collapse. And you could say American troops should have stayed longer, but you weren't going to hold things together if eventually we didn't change.
Well, so
or Maliki didn't change. I think what has to happen now is to rethink the structure of this government. You know, the Kurds, for all practical purposes, are autonomous. The Shia areas in the south are much their own masters. I think that there's going to have to be some brokering of autonomy or semi-autonomy, especially in the Sunni areas, to put them up on an equal par with the other two. Yeah. If that doesn't happen, you're just going to see this chronic problem repeating itself time after time.
And it would mean, and perhaps we're already seeing that, an end to Iraq as we know it. General Hertling, General Zinni, thank you so much. Thank you as well to Barbara Starr.